That's proved to be a significant impediment to moving up facilities, costs of $5, $10, I've got a case that involved over $30,000 that's been requested from railroads in order to build infrastructure. And when you start multiplying that across the state, you can imagine the challenges associated with that. So I think there was a real good bill that was passed that caps those fees while still protecting railroad interests and safety and having insurance and that sort of thing. And hopefully that will work effectively and be helpful moving forward. The other piece of legislation which is on the agenda is the competitive market regulation piece that we've been pursuing for several years. The context for this is your regular traditional voice service. At one time, was at one time regulated on a rate of return basis. There were changes in federal law allowing competitive providers to come in, and at the same time, the Minnesota legislature passed a couple of statutes that created sort of a transitional form of regulation as a competitive marketplace developed, and large providers like CenturyLink and Frontier are regulated under that statute right now, which creates an alternative form of regulation and certain price caps moving forward. But there still are some significant differences between that regulation and the regulation that competitors, such as Tony's clients, have in front of the commission. There's differences in the way pricing is approved, there's differences in the reporting that needs to be done, and a variety of things like that. So, as the marketplace has evolved, we felt like it would be appropriate that the incumbent providers be regulated in the same fashion as competitive providers, and pursued legislation that would accomplish that. And sort of out of the meat grinder, the statute that's been passed around is what has come out. The way the statute works is Subdivision 6 describes how if a company is successful, they'll be regulated. And essentially what it does is it references the rules that cover competitive local service providers, clarifies some other, and identifies them. And then the further sections include some consumer protections. There was a lot of concern out of AARP, consumer groups, the Attorney General's office, that if you did this, some of the basic local service consumer protections might go away, such as the obligation to offer service. And that's maintained in Subdivision 9 of this statute. There are pricing concerns, and so in Subdivision 8 there are some caps on what basic local service will be over a period of time. And while there are some increases in there, those increases are really inevitable because the FCC has issued some orders that take away some revenue pieces and has set some floors regarding what local rates should be over a going forward time period. And then there are just some other provisions that preserve existing law. What the statute, in order to be regulated in this fashion, a company needs to file a petition. The criteria for that petition are in Subdivision 4 of the statute, and there are sort of two tests. The first is if you serve less than 50% of the households in an exchange service area, which is basically a local calling area, and at least 60% of the households in that area have an alternative for local voice service available, then you're entitled to relief. If you serve more than 50% of the households in that area, then there is, in subdivision 2, starting at line 413, sort of a more expansive test that takes into account not market power and a variety of things associated with that. In order to obtain that relief, you file for you petition with the commission for that relief. The requirements for that petition are in subdivision 2, and the process for reviewing that petition is in subdivision 3. In applying the market test, one of the important things that this legislation does is it clarifies that a wireless provider counts as a competitor. And one of the debates that often happens in front of utilities commissions as these issues that come up across the country is whether wireless is in fact a substitute for a landline phone. We have argued since Center for Disease Control statistics indicate that 46% of the people in the state of Minnesota have dropped their landline phone and only have a wireless phone, that in fact it is a substitute. But this legislation resolves that issue since wireless is in fact a substitute. It also, through the definition of competitive service provider, excludes providers that don't use their own facilities primarily to provide the last mile of service. So in looking at the competitive test, at least the way I've looked at it, it really counts wireless providers and it counts cable companies are considered as competitors. And there may be some others that qualify, but identifying them is somewhat different. We filed a petition on June 30th with the Utilities Commission, and it's going to be a robust proceeding to resolve that petition. But and so we'll see how this actually works in practice. But I do think this bill represents a wonderful effort to balance concerns about protecting consumers, creating a very clear test for when a market would be considered competitive, and then creating a level playing field as far as how companies are regulated that are similarly situated.
So, just to understand, when you filed a petition, it's a whole petition, but each exchange is treated under either subdivision, either the less than 50% or the more than
50%,
and has to be evaluated as such. So does the commission then...
The system has detected that a minimum number of lines are connected to this conference. Do you want to continue your meeting? Press 1 to confirm.
Do they rule on the entire thing, or can they rule...
They have to rule section by section.
Okay.
Which I wasn't thrilled with as we were working through this, but our petition has gone through, and identified statistics.
How many?
There's 108 exchange serving areas that, and that's for the traditional West Corporation and traditional U.S. West company. We have filed for approval in all 108 of those sections. Our view, and this is certainly an advocacy hat, is the statistics aren't close. We meet this standard very easily. And, but we will be looking at it.
Questions?
Are either of you fellows aware of anyone who's keeping track of statistics on company investment, whether it be competitive providers or incumbent providers, on a relative basis? We hear a lot here about this company's investing so-and-so many millions of dollars, and this company's investing
industry members did put a figure together of investment, or at least we're attempting to. I don't have that at my fingertips, but it'd be something I would be willing to try to go back and bring that back.
Although John was asking that for the aggregate number, but relative investment across providers, right?
Yeah, because, you know, the whole argument is you want increased competition, you want better services, you want to decrease the regulatory barriers that disincent investment. And at the same time, you hear how incumbents have an oligopoly or monopoly, and they aren't rolling out the infrastructure that's necessary to get the kind of speeds that technology would have us wanting in this day and age. And I'm just curious if anyone has any metrics or is even data on how you would actually determine whether those investments are being made in a way that's significant to getting consumer choice and deployment out into the field.
So we actually tried to assemble last year for the report, and I think we asked that this maybe more closely tracked to be submitted for this year's report in Minnesota. The amount of company investment. It's harder to do than you would expect, and I don't know if we're making progress on this front this year. Not with the idea, I mean, you have a different take on what you're asking, Don, and I think the idea of reporting in the report is that this is I think our thought in reporting the number is that it's a multifaceted solution to get service to people in the speeds that people need. And so private industry investment doesn't stop even if you have a program like the state broadband program. And so tracking that number is important to understand, is it increasing, somehow do we slow down that number? I mean, looking at it over time, is that fair to say?
Yes, I mean, when we surveyed the industry segments and everybody but VoIP, so we have the wireline telephone, wireless providers, cable providers that have all contributed to that number. The problem is it's hard to distinguish the numbers for new investment versus the capital expenditures for continuing investment, because you got to continually upgrade your network, and so it's constantly moving down the road. It's just how fast it's moving down the road. So we provided some numbers for the task force last year for 2015 investments and then projected 2016 investments. We're going to be starting that process to collect. We're kind of waiting for the construction season to be over to collect the numbers for 2016 and then projection for 2017.
I just wanted to respond to one of the pieces of what you asked on about who's watching to see what money is being spent, to see if there's a potential for a monopoly. And this is one of those places where legacy carriers are regulated differently. Anyone who receives legacy support from the FCC is pretty, I'm trying to think of politically. Their expenditures, what they get and how they spend it, is very closely monitored by the FCC. They have to file on July 1st a very extensive report about what they got and exactly where it went. And it's only going to get more expensive as the broadband applications are going up. So that information isn't always public because it can be held confidential by the carriers, and it's really competitively sensitive, which is part of the problem in getting really good data, is that people inherently don't want to share it.
Yeah, I just had one other point or suggestion, and this is more of an advocacy suggestion, but as I look at the presentation on the VoIP and Denise's question as well, it strikes me that piece of certain carriers not being subject to the DAM and the 911 sort of regulation is really the piece that it seems like anyone would buy into easily. And so from an advocacy standpoint, if I had my thinking cap on, I might say, well, why don't we try this 2 bills? Because you're going to get people to jump on board, perhaps, with the CAP, CAM, 911, and all of a sudden we have perhaps an easier sell on the VoIP deregulation. Just thinking out loud and really crazy, but just sort of like that food for thought.
So I was actually customers and Department of Public Safety both maintaining that TAP-TAM and 911 are fixed wire are required to pay into. So that's nothing that would be new under the court legislation.
But I think the evidence is that you have providers who are not paying.
And I think that's more of an enforcement issue.
Well, let's hear.
I'll stay out of the advocacy of the voice.
Yeah.
If I could just offer an anecdotal thing to your original question. It sounds cliche, but capital flows to the path of least resistance. And I wore Andy and Jason's hat in an earlier life in Ohio, and I can tell you, I mean, congratulations to them for getting their bill done. But I've got a list of 20-some states that are far and away even further down the road, or I would argue modernizing, where consumers are, where the industry already is in terms of regulation. And this was very much needed, but a very incremental approach. We've never had these discussions about if we do this, therefore would you invest in something. In Ohio, the bill that I worked on 10 years ago, we got the bill done, and part of it was, an economic development discussion. We then deployed D-SLAMs in every one of our wireless centers when that bill was passed. Another bill, after we did video franchise reform, $350 million investment so that we could build our own network to deploy them. And then in the third one, under a Democratic governor, Ted Strickland, we put in a $200 million wireless data center in Akron, Ohio. It had been an Ohio Bell data center 20 years before. It had been pretty much, just kind of a building with some assets, and we put that in there. There is an investment story, but it's about talking from an economic development perspective of what the possibility of legislation can do, as opposed to, we need this language for more enforcement of this. We need to kind of get out of that, the regulation of more enforcement, and, that's just from my industry perspective, but that's where states are already going. Part of that, too, is we haven't seen anything from Congress in 20 years. It used to be that the FCC would kind of set the parameters, and then states would kind of do the conforming language or, interpretation. The last, I think there's some reference, like one or two references to the Internet in the Telecom Act of 1996. You just think of where we already are, on the advent of the iPhone 7 coming out tomorrow. So we're way behind.
So, okay. Other questions, comments?
Will the iPhone 7 have a headphone jack?
Yes. That's my Bluetooth speaker.